You know, the one thing that's brought down even the most greatest, most successful men in history, the most high value men, is the lack of sexual discipline. Whether it was King David, King Solomon, previous emperors of Eastern nations, empires, lust is the most dangerous vice for a reason. And it doesn't really matter what stature of life that you've reached. Every dude is horny as shit. Like if you take a look at how many high status successful guys have been caught up in cases and allegations and marriages ruined and losing money and things of that nature, regardless of whether those accusations are true or false, there's still situations that you put yourself in 99% of the time for dealing with these types of women. You know, for having that lack of sexual discipline. And actually, you take a guy like Shannon Sharp, right? Perfect example. He ended up having to pay a settlement of like $20 million to some 20-year-old OnlyFans chick. Yo, I ain't gonna lie, she must have had him looking crazy on that tape if he was willing to pay out $20 million to settle outside of court. $20 million, generational wealth you could have given to your family, but you ended up paying out to some succubus all because you wanted to smash some 20-year-old OnlyFans chick. That's tough, I ain't gonna lie. But the point is, even the most successful men in history, the one vice that all men are susceptible to, irregardless of your accomplishments, is having that lack of sexual discipline. It is lust. And actually, oftentimes the more successful you become, the harder it'll be to resist because you start to have more and more options. And we live in an era of instantaneous connection and social media where if you're successful, you can advertise that success and play the status game. And then you can basically use social media to window shop or exercise your lust. You know, we're not bound to the constraints of geographical location like they were in the past. Nowadays, if you're a guy with status, you can quite literally hit up a girl from the other side of the country and see her this weekend. Like, a lot of people don't understand how that fact in itself has completely changed the dating game. And if you compound that on top of the fact that status is now more attractive than ever, especially to younger women who worship social media and fame nowadays. And bro, it kind of had me thinking, like, could you imagine if kings back then with like hundreds of concubines in the past had social media? Bro, we would all be related. I would quite literally be your big bro. Or little bro if you're in your late 20s or 30s watching me right now. But again, if there was one X factor that a guy can have to put himself above even the highest value men, then it is going to be your ability to control your sexual urges, have that sexual discipline. And that is the one advantage that we are all capable of having, irregardless of your status or your accomplishments. And I'll be honest, right now I'm kind of a hypocrite. Like, I could have made this video any other time this year and I wouldn't be. And it's a common criticism, which is fair, but the point is, imagine the time and energy and the resource you would conserve by understanding how much of it is a waste of time and having the discipline to fight that lust. Like bro, sexual discipline quite literally gives you infinite power because you're not bound by it like 99% of your competition is. Like, it genuinely is a massive competitive advantage. If Elon Musk was spending his Saturday nights scrolling X for some girl next door looking chick to impregnate, if you have sexual discipline and you're not chasing those activities, then that's a Saturday night that you essentially have over even a billionaire like Elon Musk. So if we extrapolate that to a greater point, right? Imagine the advantage you would have if you compounded that over the course of 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. Like, genuinely, just think about how often guys are not only chasing sex, but even thinking about sex and how that takes away from your focus. You know, just draining your physical and your mental energy, and your spiritual energy, to be honest. But here's the thing, right? Here's the unfortunate caveat to having that level of sexual discipline. Here's the paradox. But the unfortunate contradiction of that situation is, I don't think you can get to that point as someone who's, you know, maybe a virgin, or maybe you're at the point where sex is something that's extremely foreign to you, where you view getting laid as like finding treasure. Like, the reason why it's extremely hard to have that sexual discipline in this situation is because you're always going to want it. You put it on a pedestal and it's going to make you crave it. Especially in the generation we live where pornography is so accessible. It's a billion-dollar industry. Social media itself is quite literally softcore pornography. It's filled with temptation and sexualization, and you got Instagram showing you all these baddies and thirst trapping and things of this nature. I mean, listen, my feed is filled with food and basketball and boxing and animal videos. I don't know about you guys. Okay, there might be a few baddies in there, but the point is, it's almost impossible to get to that point of sexual discipline, unfortunately, unless you've gone through it to some degree. Again, going back to how value and scarcity are linked, right? The more scarce sex is to you, the more you're going to value it, especially as a guy. And on the opposite end, the less scarce it is, then the less you're going to value it, the less you're going to care. It's extremely hard to genuinely value something that you have an abundance of. But also, you got to keep in mind that when it comes to something like sexual access that you have an abundance of, you can either go down two routes. You either A, go down further the route of sexual depravity trying to fill that void, or you understand how empty and hollow that void is and you no longer chase it. And actually, I'll just be honest, right? Right now I have 2 friends with benefit situations where it's extremely low effort. Like one of them, we don't even go on dates. We just pull up once or twice a week, FaceTime, and we get on with our week. But after about like 2 months, and I'm at the point where, and it's also what gave me the inspiration to make this video right now to talk to you guys. But I'm at the point where right now I'm like, I'm kind of good. I went almost this entire year celibate for the most part, and then got into those situations, and now that it's no longer scarce, I'm kind of good without it. And each and every single time, I try to hold on to this feeling so that when it does become scarce again, I have that juxtaposition. Because you almost quite literally need that feeling to have something to compare it to. Like now, every time I need to fight that lust, I'll just remember like, oh, it feels empty. It's about 15-20 minutes of physical pleasure, and then I'll remember that hollow feeling afterwards. And then I'll always do the same thing where I complain to my boys about how I need a girlfriend. But it's like I couldn't have that perspective if I didn't go through it, because you're always going to wonder what it's like otherwise. Especially because of how much hookup culture is glorified on top of that. You got your boys talking about it, sharing stories like, yo, last week I just linked up with so-and-so and that shit was a movie. Now all of a sudden you feel left out. Now you're thinking to yourself, shit, I want to get some, like I want to get in line for the buffet. Like because of how much hookup culture is glorified, it's hard to have that sexual discipline. And actually, I was on a call with a viewer about a few weeks ago. He was a young guy in college, really good kid. And he was telling me about how he was a virgin and how he wanted a girlfriend. And he kept on asking me like, bro, how do I get laid though? And it's funny because it was hard for me to answer that question for multiple reasons. Number one, I never want to tell anyone or promote anyone to go chase pointless hookups. But my position is that I'll never promote it, but I'm also not going to condemn it or make a big deal out of it or act like it's the end of the world. Because at the end of the day, it's like, it's the world we live in. Even like the most devout religious people, how many do you know that actually save themselves for marriage? And also understood me telling him like, nah man, forget about sex, is completely pointless and a waste of this call. Like he's a young guy who's a virgin in college. So what I said was, and I tried to play the middle as much as I could. I said, the answer to how you get laid is centered around how you want to use your time. The first way to use your time to quote unquote get girls or to get laid or whatever is, it's the boring answer, but it's to focus on yourself to a point where eventually it becomes easy to you and it's not something that you have to chase. Like that's the boring obvious answer, which I could tell obviously isn't what he wanted to hear. Most guys don't want to hear this, let alone a young guy in college. You're like, nah, how do I get laid this weekend though? The second way to answer this question is the tips and tricks angle, which is not a good use of your time. But it's basically where you source as much as possible, where you go on dating apps, use social media, go to parties, cold approach, join clubs, reproduction class, social events, etc. It's like if you want to get rained on, you have to step outside or go where it might eventually rain. To where eventually, if you put yourself in enough social circles and social interactions where you're interacting with women, eventually you're going to catch a whale on a slow Tuesday in the right moment. That I guess is the quote unquote fastest way to do it, is to source as much as possible and to treat it like a numbers game. Where you weed out the time wasters, always escalate, get the number, set up a date, make it casual, make her laugh, flirt, make it fun for her, tease her. You escalate physically on the date, go back to her spot, maybe she goes back to yours. That's the oversimplified version on how to get laid ASAP, which again is not a good use of your time or recommended at all. But yeah, I basically gave him a mix between the two answers. Make sure you put yourself first, your schoolwork, your career, your health, your physical health, basic self-improvement stuff. And then once you have those priorities in check, then you can put socializing with girls as your number 2. Like as long as you never let it get in the way of your number 1 priority, then whenever you have free time, use all of it to socialize. Take advantage of the fact that you're in college, where you quite literally have multiple avenues and plenty of excuses to interact with women. Put yourself in as many social circles as possible in relation to your interest. Basically stand outside if you want to get wet. But again, you never want to be just that dude who's chasing sex all the time and has no sexual discipline, because it really is such a low ROI activity. Because the less value you have in the sexual dating market, then the more time you're going to have to invest if you want to get laid. The more dates you're going to have to go on, the more attention you got to give, the more energy you got to expend, and also the more money you got to spend. You're spending most of the week thinking about what outfit to wear, how to take her back to your place, you're cleaning down your apartment, you're calling, you're FaceTiming, you're texting her throughout the week. And on top of that, more than the time you're investing, it's also the energy you're giving to it, the mental energy you're expending. You're essentially spending all of that to get a nut. And this is also why I'm okay with my situation, because it's extremely low effort. Whereas the more value that you do have, the less time you're going to need to invest. This is where you put yourself as the number 1 priority and you lock in. And then eventually you get to a point where you get to decide what you want to do. But it's while dating seasons because it allows me to keep my blade sharp and I have experiences to talk about. But But I also now have that feeling, that juxtaposition, where I've gotten to the sweet spot in terms of sexual discipline, where I'm not consumed by it, where I'm not thinking about it all the time, and I realize how empty it is. And again, it's why every single time afterwards, I just joke with my boys like, bro, I need a girlfriend. Because I know with a girlfriend, with someone you love and care about, it's millions of times better than just some hookup. And having that perspective allows me to have a certain level of sexual discipline. Sexual discipline quite literally is infinite power. It's just that the unfortunate thing about it is that, especially nowadays, you probably have to go through at least a little bit in order to achieve that level of discipline. Anyways, hope you guys got some from that. Make sure you check out the Patreon. Been putting a lot of work there. Been giving a lot of game as well. A lot of reactions. Follow the IG as well to connect with me on there if you want to message me. And if you want to talk to me one-on-one, feel free to book a call. And with that said, make sure you guys stay true. Talk to you guys real soon. And I'll see you at the top. Peace.